Hope and change were the key promises that took Barack Obama to a historic triumph in the election of 2008. With the economy, health care, and foreign policy as some of the major issues, this current presidential election appears to be uncertain, as Republicans and Democrats dispute one more time the destiny of our nation. I'm Ted Williams, and we discuss the current presidential election today on The Professors.
From across the city and the 7 city colleges of Chicago, broadcasting from 63rd and Halsted at Kennedy King College, The Professors, taking the art of conversation to a higher degree.
Before we start our conversation, let's take a look at the student-produced video on today's subject.
At this point, have you made up your mind as to who you might vote for?
Yeah, I'll probably be voting for Barack Obama.
Pretty much anyone but Obama.
I made up my mind about 7 years ago. Barack Obama.
Well, actually, I'm leaning way away from Barack Obama.
We interviewed about a dozen people at Chicago's Millennium Park to gauge public opinion about the presidential election. Most people have already made up their mind about who they will be voting for in November.
There are those of us who are still struggling. So my choice for candidate is the one that has a mind to improve with that for the people, just not for himself.
I'm disappointed in what Obama did, but I don't think he did that bad of a job compared to prior administrations.
No matter which party they identify with, most people we talk to have very strong opinions about the primary season.
Have you been following the primaries or the election coverage thus far?
I did at the beginning, and then it kind of became more of a clown show.
It's kind of interesting, kind of crazy. What's all the back and forth, especially with the Republican primaries. No, this person is up, they're number one, and then they're not anymore. And this person's up, they're number one, and no, they're not anymore.
Basically, the infighting between all the Republicans is kind of ridiculous, and I don't see them having a very strong candidate forward.
And I think in general the political climate right now is a bit too polarizing, and so I think a lot of Americans find themselves more towards the middle or wanting to compromise, and it's disappointing to see so many candidates that are uncompromising and willing to work with the other side.
We probably don't like all the negativism, but I guess that's what our political system has turned into, is to get one up on the other guy.
And in the end, all of the infighting, the debates, the primaries, the negative ads, all come down to one day in November.
I think it would be a close race, but and again, it depends on who the running mate is. I think how things go with the economy between now and November, a lot of things can change.
Who might an ideal candidate for you be?
Like Lenny Bruce, Bill Hicks. It's a bummer because those guys are about dead, but I think they'd be pretty cool.
Reporting for The Professors on WYCC PBS Chicago, I'm Allison Williams.
Joining us today for this conversation are Professors Nick Panamitros from Kennedy King College, UIC, and Harper College, Akbar Dima from Chicago State University, Connie Mixon from Elmhurst College, and Rafael Rivadeneira from the Republican National Hispanic Assembly of Illinois. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so we're talking about the presidential election, and as we talked before the show, I figure this will be a very good and vibrant discussion here. Because right now we've just solidified essentially that Mitt Romney is going to be the nominee for the Republicans, and so the general election is on. There's a headline recently that said, election game on. It's time to go. So I'd like to hear, to start the conversation, what do you think about President Obama's chances of re-election? Anyone can answer that question, but I'd like to start there. Okay.
I think he has a more difficult time winning this time around than last time. I mean, he is the incumbent, and he's not going against an incumbent. The economy is still very weak, anemic, and the Republican candidate, Romney, seems to be more to the center. I think that if Obama can make it.
Center of what, right?
Sorry.
That is my opinion, okay? But it's more center rather than right.
Well, which Romney are you talking about?
I'm afraid not the one who is going to be.
I think I'm going to be ejected out of here soon.
Okay. Let's get Rafael in this conversation. Rafael, I know obviously as we've talked in the past. What do you think the best case for Romney over Obama is?
Well, first of all, I mean, I have to address, this is always an example how left of center some people are
Okay.
when they think that Romney is not a centrist candidate.
Okay.
Throughout the primary, I think the far right or the conservative wing of the party was always looking for somebody other than Romney.
Sure.
So I think all Obama has to do right now, not has to do, but what he has left, since he can't run on his policies or his failed economic plan, is to paint Romney as some ultra-conservative, which he's not. But he's very much of a centrist Republican candidate, and I think that's what he presents, is good policies going forward.
I'll agree with you that that's probably the true Romney, but I think the primary pulled him so far right, and he's had to flip-flop on so many different issues that it's going to be tough for him to actually come back to the center in a general election.
And the question, I think, was, what does Obama have to do? And of course, now we're going to talk about anybody but Obama.
Yeah.
Obama, all he has are diversions, distortions, distractions, anything to not talk about his failed economic policies.
Would
that
you
after
mind,
3 years
would you
have not
mind
done anything.
substantiating what you have just said? When you say he has done this and that, would you mind giving us the substantiation of the claims you are making?
Yeah, I think unemployment above 8%, interest rates are near zero and have failed to stimulate this economy. Millions of people, if not looking for work, don't have enough work.
Sure.
And I think that's what the topic should be about. His policies have not made anything better over the last 3 years, especially 2 years when he had a Democrat-controlled Congress that could have passed anything to stimulate this economy.
Well, let me say this. Let me say this though, because I am sitting in the middle, okay, and so I'll play the middle here on this, okay. So let's just take this concept, okay. Let's take the concept, the idea that maybe the economy is somewhat cyclical, right? And that maybe that the economic challenges that we have are a little bit more long-term than what can be solved in sort of 2 years. Let's also take the idea and the concept, and Connie was going to mention healthcare, we can talk about the car industry and that sort of thing. There is evidence, and I will say this, and I'll go ahead and lay my true colors out here, okay? I'm probably leaning towards Obama in this election. Primarily, not because I'm completely satisfied with Obama, let me say that very clearly. There are lots of things that I would like to see him do differently. But the choice that we have between him and Romney, I always feel, someone in the segment that we just watched mentioned sort of the clown show or something like that. I thought it was interesting, and not to be insulting, but I feel that the Republican field has been so challenged in putting forth a candidate that even they can all get behind. It's very difficult to look at that and say, okay, they have a very good shot of beating Obama. And the truth is, as Connie mentioned, Mitt Romney, with all due respect to him, who is he? Is really a question that I think not just I have, but even Republicans have, people have all over the map. So I think, honestly, Obama's chances are probably good in that way, although, I'm disappointed all the way around. Many of us choose the lesser of two evils when it comes to politics. And in this case, I think that happens to be Obama. What were you going to say?
Well, when, the clown show, it was a different flavor of the week. And I think the big question is whether or not the core of the Republican Party actually is truly behind Romney. And do they have the same questions that I think a lot of voters have about whether or not they can trust Romney? And I think Obama and Romney both have the same question. It's going to depend on turnout. They both have to get their base to turn out. And particularly for Obama, young voters are going to play a key role in this election. They turned out in mass numbers in 2008, and is that enthusiasm still
less
there?
Engaged this time around.
Much less engaged.
Okay, let me say lightheartedly that unless the Secret Service abandons him and go to Colombia and continue to engage in social debauchery, and he has no protection, he will win.
Okay.
That's my prediction.
Okay.
But partisanship aside, let me say a few things here. The economy that he inherited was almost going through collapse. He came and things turned around, things are slowly. The economy is growing, but at an anemic rate. The new figures released by the Department of Commerce today show that the economy is growing at 2.2%. The prediction was at 2.5%. So it's about 3/10 less than what was predicted. The economy is growing. And the spending of the problems you talked about.
Sure.
Mandatory spending and all of these, Medicare and Social Security, all of these are long-term economic issues.
Sure.
The budget that he has proposed is going to be in deficit just as any other, because this spending cannot be tackled.
Professor, let me just stop you for a second, because I want to actually address this question, because what you're bringing is very, very important and very vital. But unfortunately, in politics is so much about perception.
Right.
And so the question I want to come back to, because the data you mentioned is real and true, and we know it, but the question becomes, does the average person recognize that, and how will they vote, as a result?
And
I think, go ahead.
Yeah, and before Connie cut me off, I was saying that usually if an incumbent is in and the economy is doing well, he's going to usually prevail. Here, it's question is 6 months from now, will the economy be a little worse, the same, and if 6 months from now, if it's worse, you might see it be, Romney takes those undecided voters, because it's very close.
Okay, absolutely.
And I think also that Obama's got to run against Romney plus his Tea Party, and not make it Obama versus Romney. Okay. If he can make it where the Tea Party is part of his party, even though Romney's had issues with the Tea Party branch, I think that's gonna make a big influence.
The problem is which Romney will show up in October. The one that is centrist, as you said, or the one that is far right, or the one that is slightly to the left of center. Sure. So Romney cannot be pinned down in ideological terms. It is very difficult for him to move from running on the right to win the primary and running as a centrist, particularly when you take him on his policy of health care that is very similar to the Obama policy that the Republicans were hoping to run against him.
Raphael, oh, that's, so once again, I think we're throwing some things at Romney. I'd like to hear your take on this.
Yeah, well, I think the primary battle was extensive, and we got to debate a lot of different policies. There were a lot more candidates that were more conservative than Romney. Romney's not a far-right candidate. And the left, I think, their base is sitting on their hands. I mean, they're very angry at Obama for not closing Gitmo, for not getting out of different places around the world that we promised that we were going to do. He said there was going to be a different tenor of government. Yeah. It's more divisive than ever. And I think, so for those people that thought that Obama was going to bring a new kind of leadership, they were very much lied to. And I think, do you tell them again this is what you're going to do? And maybe some people will fall for that, but most people won't. And I guess the general election comes down to the middle. The independents that don't participate in the primary, and what are they looking at? The common thing of the kitchen table issues. Most people, according to the New York Times poll, said nearly 40% of the people think the biggest economic problem is just paying their bills at the end of the month.
Yeah.
So we can start talking about different things that maybe the base on both sides don't like.
When we say Romney is far right, we point to a number of issues. One, his support for Governor Scott Walker in Wisconsin, who is trying to kill the unions and who is going to be recalled on June 5th. We talk about his support of the egregious, draconian even policy on abortion in Virginia. We talk about his far right stance on immigration in Arizona. All of these things are things we point to.
But these are political positions for him. They're not policy positions, because when he was the governor of Massachusetts, he didn't take those positions. He didn't take radical positions on well, obviously immigration is not a border state, but he didn't take radical positions on abortion either. So
he would not have succeeded in Massachusetts.
Exactly.
That's
so
why
there's a candidate.
Well, he wouldn't have succeeded in the primary if he didn't flip-flop on it.
Absolutely.
And I think as part of this whole conversation, and I think the Obama campaign is following this strategy to some extent, is the obstruction that the administration has faced from Congress. And part of what they'll have to do in this election is to not only talk about Romney's policies, but to talk about Republicans in general. And the Congress has opposed Obama on nearly everything he's wanted to do. I mean, something as simple as 9/11 first responder health care, to the debt ceiling, to the DREAM Act, to student loans, the student loans now. These are things that have had broad bipartisan support for years. But when you have the Senate minority leader coming out saying that his #1 goal is not acting on behalf of the people, but to make sure Obama's not elected, you know.
And I think people see that, and I think especially the student loan thing this past week. I mean, really, how can you in any way, shape, or form argue that we should increase interest rates on student loans?
Republican, it was a really good use of the presidential bully pulpit. You know, he talked about this during the State of the Union on the student loan issue, and Congress refused to act on it until Obama started going out on his college tour.
And taxpayer-funded dollars, by the way.
But
Well, I mean,
but now,
okay, which is what all presidents do. I mean,
presidents
come on. Let's,
but
you know,
now the minority leader has said that he would support it insofar as they are going to make cuts to Obamacare, which is about $6 billion.
More deflection from the reality of the situation that Obama had a majority in Congress the first 2 years when he made all these promises and didn't do anything.
He was too willing to compromise then, in my opinion.
Right.
He was too willing
have
to
to compromise. He was willing to ram through Obamacare without compromising. And he didn't
He compromised,
that was heavy
a
compromise,
huge
Raphael,
amount on health care.
because it was public option first, and we went all the way down to
So he
the
lied about
insurance
that too.
mandate.
And
Well,
then-
no, it's part of the political process
Right.
of
So the
changing
issue then
legislation.
becomes is now we're going to blame Republicans for his failed policies. The Democrat majority leader, which has more power than the minority leader, is the one that has blocked many of these issues when he had the chance to bring them forward. And now the Democrats want to just blame anybody, but put forward ideas as to how you're going to solve this mess. You can blame Bush, you can blame the Republicans, and all that he's not doing, though, is accepting responsibility for his failed policies. And Romney has put forward ideas. You might disagree with the ideas. Well, let's debate those ideas.
Namely-
But the fact of the matter is that I think most people will not be trying to see, well, who's blaming the Republicans more? Is it, is it Romney? Is it the Congress? No, Obama needs to accept responsibility for these and put forward ideas that he thinks are going to improve the economy.
But see, the thing at the end of the day, we all have ideas, right? I mean, you and I, we all have, at this table we have ideas. Running for president is not about ideas, it's about your record. And the truth is that Mitt Romney's ideas and his record are completely different. In the real world, the Obamacare plan is the plan that Mitt Romney did in Massachusetts. So how in the world do you get beyond that in the conversation?
Obamacare is unconstitutional. We'll probably find that out in a few weeks.
Well, we'll see.
And so
We'll
one of his
see.
major accomplishments has turned out to be unconstitutional.
Yes,
and
but it
something
was
now
one
that he's trying to
inspired by
figure
Mitt
out.
Romney. Come on.
The point being then is that Obama's policies, which he's the president, not Romney, put forward
But
an
he needs
unconstitutional
Congress.
plan that is also affecting economic growth and is stifling business from wanting to invest and free up capital because they're so scared of what's going to come down the pike. Obamacare is making things more expensive, not cheaper, in terms of health care.
Okay.
And that is what has to be addressed, is he was responsible for ramming that through the
The
Congress.
Congressional Budget Office, which is nonpartisan, actually has indicated that the health care plan will actually save money, and we won't see the full
Absolutely.
implementation of the health care plan in 2014.
Hopefully we
So-
won't see it because it'll be deemed unconstitutional.
Well, the Constitution is only what the judges say it is,
Sure.
and when
And these-
these particular
Sure.
judges on the
Judges-
Supreme Court may say it's unconstitutional, but
Well,
another
now-
group of
so
judges
that's the
might
point.
not.
Now the Supreme Court is irrelevant. They're just a majority at this point.
The Supreme Court is going to rule. Is going to rule on Obamacare. Is going to rule.
Which Obama is now saying that it's an unprecedented thing for them to overturn something that's unconstitutional, which is what their role is.
Well, but
that's
no,
politics.
but
Now
Obama was also talking about
big
judicial
policy change.
activism, and that was his major point, which the right has always
It's not
said
judicial
they're against.
activism to say something
the
is
Warren Court was too
unconstitutional.
activist.
I mean, and the Supreme Court's
we
been
wouldn't have
wrong in the
civil rights.
past. I mean, come on, with Plessy
Well,
versus
Ted,
Ferguson.
if I may bring in another issue here. Before he became president, people were saying, well, he doesn't have national security credentials, we are going to be in trouble, he can't answer the telephone call at 3 a.m. in the morning. We heard all that.
Sure.
The man came.
That was all from Hillary, by the way.
He pursued, the man came. He pursued these terrorists. He killed bin Laden. He has done fantastically well in foreign policy. Yet, all he gets from our Republican friends are criticisms. I don't know how you would react to that. The record is there for everybody to see. We are no longer hearing these yellow alerts. Somebody is coming to kill us here because Obama has, in essence, been very effective in national security.
And going back to Congress, the Senate has invoked the filibuster 70% on 70% of the bills since 2008. You can go back to the 1960s. They invoked the filibuster about 3% of the time. Up until 2008, we were at about 30% of the bills. Since Obama has become president, the Senate has threatened to invoke the filibuster on 70% of all bills.
Did the Democrats do that to Bush, Connie? I mean, come on. That's just how it works.
At
the filibuster
30%.
is there.
At 30% to 70%.
No. You're going back years. The Democrats in Congress and the
Until
Senate used
2008.
the filibuster, used it just as much, if not a little less, than whatever the stat is. To act like the filibuster is something the GOP invented now. I mean, come on, let's get past that. That is something that it's part of the balance of powers to try to get something.
But there are nuances. There are nuances.
And when
here.
they had, when they had the ability to forget about the filibuster because they had a supermajority in the Senate. They failed to do it.
There are nuances here that you have to take into consideration. For instance, they threatened to filibuster even his federal code
nominations. The minority doesn't have a voice?
Nominations.
The minority has a voice, and that is the filibuster.
Okay, and you see midterm elections also, the Republicans taking the lower house. If it was such an atrocity, you would have seen just the opposite. You would have seen maintainment of the lower house by the Democrats, and the Republicans took the lower house. So I think that that's a certain indication that the public is aware of what's going on.
Let me move us to a little different point in our conversation. So, you know, we hear the sides for and against Obama, for and against Romney, but what I'm really interested in talking about is expanding the scope of the conversation so we talk about the real issues in politics overall, the problems overall. When you look at fundraising, for instance, President Obama has raised $191 million, okay? This is unheard of, if you will. Now, Mitt Romney has raised close to $90 million. So when it comes to, and there are a couple things I think this brings out. Number one, the Democrats are not necessarily the party of, you know, poor folks, that sort of thing. I mean, most of this money, half of it is coming from corporations and organizations. And truthfully, if you look at it, some of the folks who are funding the Democrats are funding the Republicans as well. They're just basically making sure that whoever gets in office, they're able to get their will. But that's one issue, so I think there's a misperception here. But the other side, I think, which is even more important to talk about, is we all lose when money interests control politics. And when you have a case like Citizens United, we look at the influence of money in politics. I don't really care whether it's Obama or Romney. The system is really not going to change when it's controlled by money interests.
The money actually levels out between Republicans and Democrats when you look at their super PACs. And of Obama's donations, the majority of his are coming from donations under $200. Romney's donations are coming from the max at $2,500 and above. But the money actually, when you look at the super PACs, each party's super PAC, it's going to even it all out. This will, by no question, will be the most expensive campaign in U.S. history. And in 2008, Obama raised $753 million to John McCain's $400 million. And part of the problem is that public financing of presidential elections is gone. It's gone. It's gone at this point. Nobody's going to take the public money anymore.
Yeah, and it's a big issue. I mean, it's one we can't ignore, because if we fall into the trap of just repeating the partisan conversations on both sides, I don't think we move beyond. And honestly, let me say this. You know, I'm not a huge Ron Paul fan, but I can say that he tapped into something that I think we have to discuss, the idea that, you know, the whole throw the bums out feeling, that both parties are pushing foreign policy that is problematic. They're pushing economic policy that's problematic. He tapped into this young people's feeling that we need to change a system altogether. Now, unfortunately, as you see, the way politics works is that those people don't necessarily get elected, but there's a sentiment there that we've got to talk about.
You could say that Obama was that person 3 years ago. The person that was going to change politics as usual, not have lobbyists, post more information, be more transparent.
Well, before you go further on that, I've got to make a clear distinction between the phenomenon behind Paul and the phenomenon behind Obama. Ron Paul's policies on paper are fundamentally different from sort of the mainstream in the box, specifically on the area of foreign policy. President Obama never claimed that he was going to be completely different on foreign policy. He claimed he'd have a different tenor. So if you look at, say, Afghanistan, Iraq, all he said was we're going to continue the war, we're going to expand it in Afghanistan, we're going to reduce it in Iraq. But Paul is talking about let's get out of all of them altogether. So I think there's a little bit different there. But I hear what you're saying. Go ahead.
What Paul misses in America, fundamental issue in American foreign policy is the so-called military-industrial complex. You bring all of these people home, you have to find employment for them. So there is this relationship between weapons procurement and foreign policy and so on and so forth that ties into economic activities of the nation. So you cannot just say, let's bring them home. You have to do some economic planning.
And I'm not saying that that's a viable policy, but I'm saying that people want a change. That's what they really want.
What Obama has done essentially is this. He came and he said, rather than get into foreign policy issues that make the United States seem like the policeman of the world, he will be consultative. He will engage in some degree of multilateralism, which he has done. And you don't see people complaining too much under his administration that the United States is behaving like the policeman of the world.
I would actually disagree with that also. I would disagree because there's a huge sentiment in Afghanistan, for instance, that is anti-American, that is just growing. And I'm not saying that it's worse than Bush, but it really is the same on many levels. Our standing in the world in that way hasn't changed. Don't get me wrong. On the surface, Obama is a much more palatable candidate in that way when it comes to foreign policy, but in practice, it's really very similar.
But he's different from the Bush unilateralism. That's my point.
Okay, we have to move to final thoughts. Why don't we start with you, Nick?
Yeah, I think that all those factors we talked about, the student loans, the foreign policy, are all going to be important. But I think in this particular election, the state of the economy is going to be the #1 thing, because this economy is not doing well, and it's just going to override everything. If in 6 months things are looking better, I think he's going to probably win. If it stays the same, I'm not sure. And if it gets a little worse, I think he's going to be in for trouble.
Sure. Connie?
Democracy is not a spectator sport. And I think that too many people are going to sit this election out, maybe because they aren't as happy with President Obama as they'd like to be. Maybe he should have done more. But what's the alternative? And he is going to have to get minorities and young people to turn out at the same rates he did in 2008, particularly in key swing states.
Yeah, in 1984, Reagan won re-election. The unemployment was around 8%. And I believe that even if unemployment remains at this level, Obama has a good chance of winning in 2012. And I think that the Republican alternative is not the way to go at this time.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, first
and
I'm
sure you'll agree with that statement, right?
I think what we haven't talked about is the out-of-control spending that has continued, just in terms of government, and that's unsustainable. All these ideas we brought out, as Nick said, and I agree, it's the economy, just like every other president has usually brought out. All these other issues, whether it be student loans or other things, are just distractions and distortions from the reality that this president has put forward failed socialist-like policies that do not work. And yet, he wants to offer people change and hope, and I don't think it's going to work this time around. Mitt Romney offers completely a good contrast in terms of somebody that comes from the private sector, an economic policy position, somebody who has been successful, which Obama is going to try to punish for being successful. That's what he is going to rely on, and I think most people in the center are going to look at that and say, you had 3-4 years to fix this mess, and nothing has happened. If anything, it got worse. If he's going to just blame other people, he's going to look very immature, and just like any other politician that wants to run away from his record. Romney offers an alternative, a contrast, offering a different direction to where to take this country after he had a chance to make it better.
Thank you all very much. It's a very good conversation. I will agree that at the end of the day, it will come down to the economy. It will come down to how people feel individually and how the president affects them individually. Unfortunately, the conversation is overly simplified in terms of what can be done in a couple of years and also how the president affects all of our lives, because in truth, I would make the case, and I always do, that our local officials, our local legislators, typically have a much more significant impact on our lives. Gas prices, for instance, being one, where certain states have gas taxes or other states don't. So hopefully, my hope and prayer is that we will move beyond the simplicity of this conversation, and we will help people to elevate the conversation to understand the complexity that's associated with this. And we'll see. We'll all be watching. So thank you all very much. This is a very good conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on The Professors.